there'll be about 1,000 strokes a year. Sorry, 10,000 strokes a year. And what you can do is look at each of the services and say, well, if everybody in Scotland was eligible for this treatment, what would be the benefit? And the left-hand column shows those calculations. So if everyone in Scotland was eligible for TPA, and we could give it to everyone within 3 hours, you know, the benefit would be enormous. And what that tells you is, you know, that if you're somebody who's having a stroke and is eligible for TPA, you really want to get it and get it quickly. And some of the service options I've showed, you know, have a more modest benefit. But of course, reality is not like that, because the second thing you need to factor in is what proportion of the population in Scotland would be eligible for those things, because they're not applicable to everyone. And so, for instance, stroke units eligible to the great majority, some of the rehab services, you know, a large minority, and you know, something like aspirin you can give pretty much to everyone with ischemic stroke. And the figures I put there for TPA, these are roughly the current figures in Scotland. About 5% of people are getting TPA. And the neurosurgery is eligible, is relevant really for a tiny proportion of people with a devastating stroke. And so what you can do is you can factor these two together and get a kind of population impact number, you know, for each of these interventions. And you can see from that that the sort of basic rehab service options, the top circle, are really among the most important. And the drug options are important, but the potential impact is surprisingly small compared with something like a stroke unit. And it also illustrates a more general point. If you've got a cheap drug like aspirin that has a modest benefit and can be given to lots of people, you can actually get quite a big population benefit. Doctors always forget that. But of course, what the thrombolysis enthusiasts would say quite reasonably is we need to be giving it to more people. You know, we need to be up at 15 and 20%. And sure enough, you would get quite a gain from that. But my nagging concern in the UK is that if we reorganise everything to provide that extra thrombolysis, and we disrupt the existing services in a modest way, we may actually lose all the benefit from you know, the new developments. And of course, people have said to me, well, there's no evidence that that would ever happen. It's all good, you know, if we centralise it'll all be good. But I think there are some cautionary tales. This is one from England, from Leicester, where they had 3 stroke units, 3 very conventional stroke units, and they centralised admissions all to one site to have a kind of hyperacute centre. One of the things that was a problem there, they didn't have a fully resourced emergency department, but that was one of the consequences of the way they did it. And what they did was they had ran a register and looked at what happened before and after this centralisation. And the centralisation was associated with significant reduction in access to the stroke unit. It built delays into the system and access to physio and OT. And there was actually a small rise in mortality as well. So they were able to give more of the drug, but it built in a delay in people accessing other things. Now, I'm not saying this will always happen, but I think we've got to think in terms of a whole system before we start tinkering around with the way we do things. And I'm pleased to say in the big stroke strategy in the UK, there is a paragraph that says exactly that. If we're going to develop new models of specialist hyperacute care stroke centres, then the impact on the rest of the pathway will need to be evaluated. And I feel a bit of a lone voice at home, a bit like an Old Testament prophet, you know, ranting in the wilderness. But I think it's a point that needs to be made. Although my colleagues just kind of groan now when I say it. What do I think? I think there are ways that we can begin to centralise without dismantling what we've already got. And one area that's of interest in Scotland is the use of telemedicine or telestroke. And I think it's important to remember this is not a treatment, it's a means of facilitating communication. But there's some interest in this in Scotland particularly. And if you like, the impetus from this comes from a study, or from several studies, but there's a rather nice one was done in Bavaria, southern Germany, which is a population of about 5 million people, I think. And what they did, the study was called Tempest. And what they did was their health insurance people funded a study to look at improving stroke services across the whole state of Bavaria. And so they did a study. They had a number of smaller district hospitals, and they connected up, they matched these hospitals, and half of them got carried on the normal way, and half were networked to regional centres with telemedicine links. And it wasn't just a telemedicine study, they also had a kind of service improvement study. And so they set up a stroke ward in each of the networked hospitals. They had 24-hour telemedicine links, but they also facilitated the development of stroke teams, effectively stroke units, care protocols. So it was a whole system service improvement. But they could transmit CT scans, they could consult with the neurology department in the centre, and they could support decisions about acute drug treatment. And what they found was now the Tempest group, these were the ones who were networked. The control group are those who carried on in the normal way. And they found that there was quite a dramatic increase in the proportion of people who got thrombolysis. And that figure now stands about 10%, I'm told. There was a better access to diagnostics, but there were also, I've only summarised one or two, things like speech therapy. They facilitated the delivery of that. Sort of quality indicators like testing for swallowing, they were all improved. And the length of stay reduced slightly. They didn't transfer quite so many people in ambulances. And overall, there was an improvement in prognosis, improvement in survival in the Tempest group. And this improvement in survival was seen up to 3 months, and even after they adjusted for various things that might confuse the picture. That improvement in survival probably was from the stroke units and the general care, but I was encouraged by this as a very kind of holistic way of trying to improve access to hyperacute care without dismantling what they already had. And in Scotland, what they're looking at, this is a map of Scotland, And the red dots are all the hospitals that have a basic CT scanner. Most of them have a basic stroke unit, which has a multidisciplinary team and a kind of a rehab philosophy that you'll recognise. And what they're trying to encourage is to network these to more regional centres. And in fact, where David used to work in Edinburgh is currently being networked with pretty much all of the southeast of Scotland. My colleague is a very impressive lady in Aberdeen who's networked to Elgin. That's can't quite show you where Elgin is, and also to her hometown of Stornoway, which is the top left-hand corner of that island. And they've actually done a few thrombolysis cases in Stornoway, which is a small town, done over this network link. So my feeling was that this is a way of kind of future-proofing, and if there's an imperative to start centralising the future, we've already got the networking systems in place. So to conclude, you've been missing your lunch, so I'll conclude that I think Hope of convinced us been great improvements in stroke management outcome, but we mustn't forget, I think the main benefits are from some of the less sexy interventions, that prevention, stroke units, early discharge. And I think acute medical people tend to forget that. But I do see that we need to focus on rapid delivery of treatments, and that applies for a whole range of treatments. But I think my cautionary tale is we need to be sure that we don't undo all the good things. And in Scotland, they say we now have about more than 80% of the hospitals have, in fact I think it's 90% recently have some kind of stroke unit. So, the basic service is there, and I don't want to undo it. But I feel that the regional networking offers the potential to support the smaller hospitals and kind of future-proof the service in case something dramatic does come along that requires people to be fired in helicopters or ambulances. So I hope I've not been, I hope I don't come over as lacking ambition for stroke. I rather like this poster that even a journey of 1,000 miles can end very, very badly. And I think it's just a cautionary tale that strokes come a long, long way. But I think that it's important that we don't undo what we're already done well. And with that, I'll just say thank you all for your attention across the state, and say I'd be happy to take any questions. Thanks.